May 23rd, May 27th, May 29th, May 31st, 4 dates, 9 days, one man. And every single time, according to the sworn complaint, he did the same thing to strangers on the sidewalk in a small Ohio town, and every single time, nobody stopped him. If any one of those 4 days had gone differently, if any one witness had been believed sooner, if any one deputy had moved faster, the story you are about to hear would have ended weeks earlier. It didn't. So today, at 10:15 in the morning, in a courtroom in Vinton County, the man behind those 4 dates is finally standing in front of a judge. His name is Gary Siders, Jr., and this is the hearing that started everything. Not the raid, not the 16 children, the 4 misdemeanors, the flashing charges, the ones almost nobody has been talking about because they got buried under the size of what came after. But they shouldn't have been buried because they are the reason the door on Ohmer Street ever opened. Hamden, Ohio, population under 900. If you have never been through Hamden, imagine a place where you can walk from one end of town to the other in about 12 minutes, where the same 3 trucks drive past your porch every morning, where a stranger on the sidewalk in the middle of the afternoon is not a stranger for long because somebody's grandmother is going to see him and call somebody's cousin. That is Hamden. That is the town where this story lives. And in that town on May 23rd, the first complaint came in. A man on Ohmer Street exposing himself, not in his own house, not to family, to someone who was not part of his household. That is the specific language in the charging paper. Because in Ohio, indecent exposure to strangers, to non-household members, is what makes it a crime. It is not a mistake. It is not an accident. It is a specific act aimed at a specific stranger. 4 days later, May 27th, it happened again. Same street, same suspect, same charge. 2 days after that, May 29th, again. 2 days after that, May 31st, again. Look at what the calendar is telling you. 4 days between the 1st and 2nd, 2 days between the 2nd and 3rd, 2 days between the 3rd and 4th. The gaps are getting shorter. That is not a man having one bad day. That is a pattern. That is escalation. That is somebody who is testing the waters and every time nobody stops him, going back out. And every single time, according to the paperwork later filed by BCI, the address kept coming back to one house, 182 Ohmer Street. Now here's the thing that has been driving me a little crazy this week. The 182 Ohmer Street address is not new information. It was in the paperwork in May. It was in the paperwork in early June. Deputies in Vinton County knew that address. Neighbors on that street knew that address. If you were paying attention to a small town of 900 people, that address was already lit up on somebody's map. And yet, for almost the entire month of June, that house sat quiet. Nobody knocked, nobody looked inside. The misdemeanor complaints stacked up on a desk and the door on Ohmer Street stayed closed. Then a woman named Rachel Phelps got involved. Rachel Phelps is a special agent with the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation, BCI. The state-level investigators who get called in when a local case needs more muscle, more resources, or more forensic work than a rural county can handle. Agent Phelps looked at the file. 4 misdemeanors, same address, same suspect, and she did what needed to be done. She put her name on the complaint. She signed the paperwork that turned 4 separate flashing incidents into one formal charge package. That signature is the piece that changed everything. Because once Agent Phelps signed, deputies had probable cause to go to 182 Ohmer Street, not to raid the house, not to search the house, just to serve the paperwork, just to knock on the door, ask for Gary Siders, Jr., and hand him a summons. Ordinary, routine, everyday law enforcement. And when they knocked, that is when it happened. That is when the door opened. That is when the deputies saw what nobody apparently had seen before. And that is when a routine flashing complaint became the biggest child endangerment case in Ohio in a generation. 16 children in one house, in one small room, behind that door. Behind a door that only opened because a state agent put her signature on a misdemeanor complaint about 4 incidents on a sidewalk. I want you to sit with the shape of that for a second, because it is not a hero story. It is not a story of a task force closing in on a family for months of careful surveillance. It is not a story of a caring neighbor picking up the phone. It is a story of a man who allegedly could not stop exposing himself in public. And the 16 children in his house were rescued as a side effect of him not being able to control that behavior. That is uncomfortable. It is supposed to be. Because if he had controlled it, if the flashing had never happened, if Agent Phelps had never signed, if the deputies had never knocked, those 16 children would still be inside 182 Ohmer Street today, right now, as you are watching this. In that same small room, nobody was coming to save them any other way. That is a system failure, not a rescue. And this morning at 10:15 in Vinton County Court, that failure is finally in front of a judge. Gary Siders Jr. has been represented by a court-appointed attorney named E. Lee Roberts. That is what happens when a defendant cannot pay for private counsel. The court appoints somebody. E. Lee Roberts stepped in. And her job today is one of the hardest jobs a defense attorney gets, because she is not defending him against the 16 felonies you have heard about on the news. Not today. Today's hearing is only about the 4 misdemeanors, the flashing, the dates. May 23rd, May 27th, May 29th, May 31st. Those 4 charges were originally set for a hearing on July 9th, but that hearing didn't happen. It got continued, pushed back, rescheduled to today, July 23rd. Which means from the day the paperwork was signed by Agent Phelps to the day her client stands in front of a judge on it, weeks have passed. Weeks in which the biggest child abuse story in Ohio broke around him. Weeks in which the gag order came down. Weeks in which the whole country learned his name for reasons that had nothing to do with the sidewalk. That is the room E. Lee Roberts walks into this morning. A room where every reporter in Ohio is watching. A room where a misdemeanor conviction is not just a misdemeanor conviction, because it goes on the record of a man now looking at felony endangerment charges. A room where the 4 dates on that calendar carry more weight than 4 small dates should carry, because they are the dates that open the door. Now, some viewers are going to hear this and say, wait, misdemeanors? He's facing indecent exposure charges after what happened in that house? That feels wrong. And you're right, it does feel wrong. But that is how the American system is built. You are charged for what you did on a specific day, at a specific place, in a specific way. The 4 misdemeanors have their own hearing. The endangerment felonies will have their own hearing. The system separates them, which means the very first courtroom appearance where Gary Siders Jr. has to answer to a judge for anything at all is happening today. And it is happening for the flashing, not the children. The flashing. Let that sit for a minute. The first accountability, the first public hearing, the first time a judge in Ohio makes him stand up and answer is for the exact behavior that got the door open in the first place. That is the poetry of it, and it is also the tragedy of it, because the misdemeanor is the crack in the wall. Without the crack, there is no rescue. Here is the thing I need you to hear as we watch what happens today. This case is not going to be won or lost in the felony courtroom alone. It is going to be shaped quietly in this misdemeanor courtroom too. Because everything the prosecution does today, every piece of evidence they lay on the table, every witness they identify, every statement they get on the record, all of it can be used later. All of it becomes part of the story a jury will one day hear. If Agent Phelps testifies today, her testimony matters for later. If a neighbor takes the stand today and describes what she saw on May 23rd, that description matters for later. Every piece of today feeds tomorrow. That is why E. Lee Roberts, if she is doing her job, will fight hard today over things that look small, chain of custody, witness identification, the date of every single complaint, because she knows what is coming next. And the prosecutor knows too. There is a bigger picture here that most people are going to miss because the misdemeanors sound like a footnote. They are not a footnote. They are the hinge. They are the moment where a small pattern in a small town, ignored for weeks, finally got somebody's signature in the right box on the right piece of paper. Rachel Phelps, May 23rd, May 27th, May 29th, May 31st. 4 dates, 1 signature, 16 kids on the other side of a door. And now the man behind those 4 dates is standing up in a room in Vinton County. The door of the courtroom opens at 10:15 this morning. Reporters are lined up on the sidewalk. The gag order is still in effect on the felony case, but not on today's hearing. That means what happens in this misdemeanor courtroom will be, for a few short hours, the most watched piece of live legal news in Ohio. Watch what the prosecutor puts on the record. Watch what E. Lee Roberts objects to. Watch whether Agent Phelps is called, because every detail that comes out today is a detail the gag order can no longer hide. The door on Ohmer Street opened because of these 4 misdemeanors. The door in Vinton County Court opens today at 10:15 because of the same 4 misdemeanors. Same pattern, same signature, different room. And on the other side of that courtroom door, for the first time since the raid, Gary Siders Jr. has to look up at a judge and answer for something. Anything, even if it is only the sidewalk. Now here is something worth stopping on, because the misdemeanor system in this country has a very old problem, and this case sits right on top of that problem. The system was built to handle small crimes fast. A flashing complaint in most rural counties gets handled inside of a couple of weeks. Deputy writes the report, prosecutor screens it, defendant gets a court date, judge either accepts a plea or sets a bench trial. Case closes. That is the design. But when you have 4 separate incidents at the same address involving the same suspect, filed by different witnesses over a 9-day window, something in that design is supposed to trip. A red flag is supposed to go up. A supervisor is supposed to look and say, wait, this is not one bad night. This is a pattern. And once it is a pattern, the case gets a second look. Somebody drives out, somebody knocks, somebody at least writes down the license plate in the driveway. In Vinton County, according to the paperwork we have, that second look did not happen fast. It took weeks for BCI to get involved. It took weeks for Agent Rachel Phelps to consolidate the complaints. And while those weeks passed, 16 children inside 182 Ohmer Street kept living the way they had been living. If the paperwork had moved faster, they would have been out sooner. That is not a criticism of any one deputy. That is a criticism of a system that is not built to see patterns. Every rural county in America has this problem, by the way. Small departments, overworked staff, big geographic areas. A single deputy might cover 100 square miles on his shift. The idea that he is going to notice 4 separate flashing complaints on one street over 9 days in between traffic stops and welfare checks and a car accident on Route 32 is not a fair idea. He might, but he might not. And the system counts on him noticing. And when he does not, the pattern goes uncaught. And in this case, the pattern went uncaught long enough that 16 kids paid for it. That is the piece of this that keeps bothering me, because it is not going to change. The next Vinton County is out there. The next 182 Ohmer Street is out there. And the deputy who is going to almost catch the pattern in that town and not quite catch it is out there too. The only reason this case broke open is that Rachel Phelps did her job at BCI. She took a file that had been sitting. She read it carefully. She saw the pattern. She signed. That signature is one woman doing one thing right. And it is the difference between 16 children in state care today and 16 children still in a room the size of your kitchen. If you take one thing from today's hearing at 10:15, take that. This case did not get cracked by a hero task force. It got cracked because one state agent read a stack of misdemeanor complaints all the way through and said, this is not 4 things, this is one thing. And her signature turned it into one thing. Legally, on paper, in front of a judge, the system almost missed it. That should scare you more than the felony charges, because the felony charges are what we already know. The near miss is what we have to fix.